Good evening. My name is Kat Gelder. I am a member of the Ministerial Search Committee here at DuPage Unitarian Universalist Church. And this is our candidate for settled minister, Mandy Huizinga. Hello, Mandy.
Hello.
Thank you so much for being with us tonight. And thank you for joining us, whether you are here in person or watching on the live stream on YouTube. We are so glad to have you here. And those of you who are here in person, if you have a question to ask Mandy, just wave your hand or yell my name, and I'm going to pass you the mic so that we can all hear your questions. Those of you who are watching on YouTube, please feel free to type any questions you have into the chat box, and our helpful AV crew will send me a text, and then I will read the question to Mandy. So if we don't get to your question right away after you type it, it's because it's just in the process. Don't worry, we will definitely get to your questions, and thank you so much for participating. We are going to have questions and chatting tonight between 7 and maybe 8:30, depending on how long it just organically takes for us to ask our questions. And is there anything I've forgotten? Those of you who've been here before, are we good?
I think we're good.
We're good, all right. So why don't we, unless someone else has a question to start us off with, Mandy, do you want to tell us why you were interested in DuPage UU Church when you started looking for a church?
Sure. So I actually began looking at DuPage shortly after we moved here in 2019, actually. I knew you guys were in search last year, but I kept my eye out for you all. Because you all's work here was exciting. And the more that I saw and followed your website, the more I saw what you all were doing, it excited me. And then I got to read your congregational record when it was available last December. And your ecological justice work, your whole church ministry, your governance work, all of those pieces were just really attractive to me. And here we are. I'm sitting in front of you today.
I don't know if more people are scheduled, but we were up in the founders room, like it said.
So some
And
people
they have
were-
a meeting up there.
Some people were up in the founders room. Okay, so.
The meeting in the founders room, yeah.
Oh, okay.
A smart recovery, I think.
Yeah. So we will.
I don't know if anyone else is scheduled to be here.
Okay. Well, we'll double check and make sure that there isn't anybody that's gone to the wrong room real quick.
Well, I was gonna leave a note. Should I go back and do that?
No, you're fine. Y'all stay here. We've just started asking questions
Yes.
of Mandy, and I can go and handle that.
I
That's
need
not
the
a problem.
exercise,
No, you need to ask questions of your candidate for settled minister. All right. So, does anybody else have a question that they wanted to ask, or should we ease into it? All right, here, I'm going to hand you the mic.
So, Mandy, we have had a number of ministers who have had significantly more years in the pulpit than you.
Mm-hmm.
So, can you let us know what you bring as a fresh out of seminary person that we might expect to be different?
Right. So I just want to let you know that I'm aware that I haven't had as much experience in the pulpit as some other ministers. And I also want to name that I have a lot of congregational life experience and congregational administrative experience. So knowing that going into seminary, that I took more classes around that. That is also my professional goals are around religious education, preaching, and worship. And that aligned well with what the ministerial fellowship asked me to do, which was continue my education in those areas. And so I am in preliminary fellowship, and during preliminary fellowship, we are evaluated in many different ways. And part of my work during that time will be making progress on those professional goals. So those are the places. So I'm learning, I'm growing, and I will continue to learn and grow. So your question was very specific about what perspective I bring. I bring a lot of the things that I want in worship and that I need in worship. When I first started seminary, I was in a Christian, a very progressive Christian seminary, but a Christian seminary. And during the week, I learned a lot from my seminary professors, but for some of the fellow students that I was in classes with were much more conservative than I was. And at the end of some of my classes, I was exhausted because trying to be the voice for so many liberal issues is exhausting after a while. And on Sunday morning, I would wake up so grateful to be able to go to my Unitarian Universalist church and be with my people. A lot of seminary students will avoid church completely because they've spent all week in seminary classes writing papers and talking about all the things that they'll get in practice in church. And I needed church on Sunday morning. I needed to sing the songs and listen to the messages that I wasn't having to fight during my daily tasks during the week. And so part of what I bring in my perspective to worship is I want this place to be a healing balm for everyone. I want it to make you think. I want it to give you joy and hope and just a place to be with your people, with my people, in this moment where we can just be ourselves and at rest. And so for me, that's really how I approach worship, because I need that. And I think a lot of other people need that too.
Thank you. Anybody here have a question?
Well,
You have some?
we, do we really need this with
Well,
four
yeah,
people?
we're online.
Yes, for the people who are on
Oh,
live
for the
stream.
people. Oh, right, I didn't even think of that.
It's a whole new world, right? After the pandemic.
Well, Mandy was with us for Elder Circle yesterday for an entire hour. And it was really, in my estimation, a full hour. When I asked her a question that's similar to Diane's about the experience, I kind of answered it for her, I think, because I brought up how I was inexperienced as a first grade teacher when I started way back when. And as I look at that, I think of the energy I had, the enthusiasm I had, the kids that I taught to read, the kids whose names I still remember, what I did to help the parents. And I just, from what I've seen of her and in her sermons and talking yesterday, I kind of feel the same way. Wow, I don't want to start now with my years of experience to be anything. So I'm really in appreciation of the fact that you are younger than some of the ministers we've had, well, maybe most, and that I've experienced, and coming in with such an enthusiastic, fresh approach. So I don't mean to be answering your question, but
That's okay.
those are the kinds of things that I'm seeing.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm Mike Winter. I'm wondering your views on humanism and how that plays. Will it be talked about from the pulpit? Will it be honored? Or what's going on with your views of humanism?
Humanism, like all theological traditions and religious perspectives in a congregation, is important to be shared in the pulpit. And every one of those traditions should have an opportunity to be shared and explored, and done in a way that both informs and offers a chance for us to together collectively explore what it means to be human in this world.
Mm-hmm. And can you share how your perspective on humanism is? What perspective you have concerning it?
I'm not sure I understand your question exactly. Like how I feel about humanism? Do I agree with it? Is that what you're kind of asking?
Not necessarily, but I wouldn't mind hearing it. Well, I think that humanism has had, and I don't know if you're aware of it, the ties that humanism has had to the DUUC specifically.
Yes.
It's in our bylaws. There's a great number of humanists here. We're tied with the humanists of West Suburban Chicago, who are now the Prairie State Humanists. And,
Right.
and I didn't know, I'd like to hear if you foresee that having an impact on you and your ministry here.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. So I actually have experience with humanism. So the fellowship that I was with in Morristown, New Jersey, was begun by humanists, and they had a very prevalent, large humanist group up probably through the early 2000s, and slowly, it's not that they faded away, but the congregation became more pluralist, generally speaking. And so they just didn't, they became part of many voices rather than the resounding voice over time. And there was something really nice about being able to have all of those perspectives in a congregation. I believe that humanism provides a fabulous and very important role in church life. It's one of many views that many people share, and I think the more that we have, the more we can grow and learn from each other. And so I welcome humanism in a congregation, and I welcome those voices. And I know that that has been super important for your church and your founding. And I want to hear other voices as well, as I'm sure others do as well. But that doesn't mean one gets lessened over any other.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's voice should be heard.
Yeah, I mean, that's the good political thing to say, everyone's voice we want to hear here. I agree with that. I think that there's some reaching out and some combining and some usefulness that humanism brings to many people here that, you know, and it's not just one of many in one sense. It's not only one of many. It is one of many, but it also has its own special place here. And I don't
Yes.
know if that's, the emphasis. We could go through months of services and never hear a humanistic viewpoint, and I felt bad about that in prior ministries.
That is important to know.
Mhm.
Thank you for telling me that. I try, as I did last Sunday, to incorporate multiple perspectives in one service, and sometimes it's important to do just one perspective from a service. But I will tell you that I generally try to speak to all of the voices in a congregation at some point within an entire year, and I try not to wait months to do that between those services. So I hear what you're saying, and I did not know that sometimes it was a long period between services where you did not hear a humanist voice, and you should, as you should hear a Christian perspective on occasion, as well as there are congregants that experience that too. So it should definitely be something that is not months apart before hearing it, especially if there's a large group of you humanists in this congregation. Absolutely. I need to speak to all of the people here.
Right.
And so you need to be heard just as strongly as everyone else. Absolutely. And so if there were months, that can be hard to hear. Yeah.
And sometimes I think the perspective that worries me when people talk about humanists, or I lead the Science Sunday, and there's a perspective that's been brought up at times that if you're science-minded and interested in scientific explanations for things and looking at the world through those things, that you don't have the capacity to look at the world with awe and wonder. And that almost like rips out my heart when I feel people pin me into that category or whatever. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's a critical thing, that the awe and wonder of the beauty of the world. Like that fantastic book you guys read, I thought, I've got a 6-month-old granddaughter, and she's got to get a copy of that real quick.
Yeah, that's one of our family's favorite children's stories.
Yeah,
You are
it
Stardust.
was awesome.
Yes, and the NASA video, the dance, yes. I have my own Taoist understanding has that awe in it. And so some of my services might not necessarily talk about any particular tradition, but just general awe of the world, and where we are in it. And that speaks to most of us, I think, especially in this congregation, which has such a strong ecological focus.
Yeah, I think that's critical. I think we felt like any time somebody wanted to say, well, there's this point of view about the beginning of the world. But you have to be very careful if you do that to not tread to this point where you're just this methodological creature that can't see the beauty in the world or something like that. And it like I say, it almost rips your heart out when you feel like people categorize you that way.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think some people might describe those categories as the difference between a secular humanist and a religious humanist.
Yeah, and that gets, we've had discussions about that, and that's an interesting.
And I'm not throwing anyone in any sort of category, and
Right.
religion can be described however you want, but for many people, that's where that definition lies. Not all, but some people find that definition helpful.
Yeah, although it again, categorizes people maybe that you can't see the awe.
Agree.
If you're
completely.
a secular humanist, you can't see the awe in the world.
And that's not entirely true, is it?
Oh, not by a long shot.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions?
Feel free if you have more. She has seen me a lot this week.
I'll ask an intermediate question while you are
Okay.
it as an interesting discussion
Yes.
about the different traditions and kind of this blending. And I guess it goes to this perhaps as, so in the discussion of the book and the children, so kind of what are your thoughts then, on religious education? I'm almost afraid to use the word religious in here because we just got kind of done talking about how that education is probably broader than that, but kind of how do you see that kind of going ahead?
For all ages, for children specifically?
Let's say for all ages at this point.
Okay. I actually prefer the word faith development rather than religious education, and all the things. I've been told to use adult enrichment rather than adult religious education. I think it should just be faith development. So wow, that's quite a question. Yeah. My thoughts on religious education. It's a lifelong process, and I think that's a good place to start. And so it begins when we're children, and it moves until we're older than old, however you define that, because we never stop learning. And so faith development, we do pretty good at faith development for our children, especially with the OWL curriculum. But beyond that, and Steve has worked really hard to put a robust religious education program together. UU congregations don't always do adult enrichment in the same way, and I come at adult enrichment in a couple of different ways. One is that adult enrichment is part of understanding what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist in the world. And so from that perspective, it impacts membership work. And so that means getting to know UU classes, orientating people to our community. And then as people have become members, then it's moving people through membership into leadership. And some people don't want to be leaders, and that's okay too. But the idea is that we're constantly deepening our relationship with our own self, our own understanding. Your science forums are fabulous, and the other forums that you had too. It wasn't just science. For a time, you had other discussion groups as well on Sundays.
We used to have open kind of just forums on a lot of different subjects as well.
Right.
Have a comparative religions group?
Yes,
Yeah,
that was
pretty
one
good.
of them.
Stream, maybe that's what you're thinking.
Yeah.
Can you say that into the mic? Because I can't hear me on YouTube.
Oh,
Oh, you could just say comparative religions.
comparative religions. I'm sorry, yeah, we had comparative religions. We also used to have kind of a general forum where we had
Yeah.
various topics. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember reading all of those things in your record. So all of those things are fabulous, and what I love about them is they happened on Sunday morning. So you could come to the worship service, and then you could get those experiences as well, and that's just wonderful in my opinion. But it's also about understanding our Unitarian Universalist history, our theology, our polity, what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist church, and how we do governance as a denomination. So if you ever visit General Assembly, you know what it means to be a delegate. But also cultivating our own sense of self and spirit around justice issues, around religious exploration of different traditions, different spiritual techniques, mindfulness and meditation. And so all of those things enrich our lives. And they're not things that just happen in a classroom setting. They're also things that happen from the pulpit on Sunday. I love that you have multi-generational services once a month. And so that is its own form of religious education, because that's obviously what's happening in the service on Sunday morning. But it's also about you all being in community together and having the children learn what it means to worship with each other and with adults. And what I'll tell you is that kids who stay in the worship services end up being Unitarian Universalists as adults. Maybe not in your church, but they will be eventually. And that's exciting to have a congregation that does that monthly and maybe more frequently sometime in the future, because that's how we're going to cultivate and grow Unitarian Universalism. So I know that was a long answer, and I could say so much more, but I will leave it at that.
That's a very broad subject for sure.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to follow up on the word worship. You just used it a couple times, and that was on my mind before you did. I'd like an idea from you of what seminarians are talking about nowadays. How do they define a worship service when most of us probably would say we don't worship? And how do you see that, and how do you use that word?
That's awesome. That's a great question. So I use the word worship as exploring the great mystery that's beyond us all, the thing that connects us, that awe piece that you were talking about, Mike. It's exploring that awe piece in community together. So that's how I understand worship. And some of that's not a supernatural thing. That is like the breath of our connections, right? That's that awe. Seminarians are understanding, and obviously, hello, welcome. I can't speak for all seminarians, and I can't even speak for all UU seminarians. I did not go to a Unitarian Universalist seminary. But the encounters that I have had in seminary with UU students have had a lot of conversation around ritual and what that means for our communities, and around what it means to include language of reverence in churches. And I know you all have had that conversation a bit here as well. But those are the two big pieces that I've heard UU seminarians speaking about, especially around ritual. There has been I'm going to use the word lamentation by many UU seminary students about how we sometimes stay away from ritual, and how there's a real drive for having the comforts that ritual and the meaning that ritual brings. So those are the conversations that they're having in worship circles that I've been around.
I guess my feeling is how.
Okay. I know, Mike, you had some more questions, right? Thank you.
Okay, so you're trying to find worship. What's the definition of ritual? What makes a ritual or make it meaningful to the congregation?
Right. So I define ritual as something that follows a pattern that brings your whole self, not just intellectual mind, but your heart and your body into a practice. And so there are some very real things that we do in our everyday lives that bring ritual to us, right? Like you wake up and you have your morning cup of coffee. And you sit in your kitchen table and you look outside, and you do that every morning, and it's a way for you to connect and ground yourself. But we do that in our churches, right? A wedding or a memorial service, and the intentional acts that we do to join people together in marriage, or to grieve a loss and to say goodbye. We do that on Sunday mornings in many different ways. Sometimes they're regular ritual, like the liturgy, the order of the service, and sometimes they're just occasional, like the fire communion, right, or your water communion. So ritual are all those things that remind us of, or embody all of those acts. I will also name that for me, ritual is also a way to mark important parts of our lives, and to remember. So for many pagan rituals, right, it's always been about the nature and the season. So you would do it every single time at every single year. Often you'd have stories integrated into that would tell that history, that you would be reminded of that. All of the Jewish holidays are ritual, right? And they're telling the stories of a people. And so I also find that important. And the reason I bring that up is because for many congregations, the story of who you are as a congregation doesn't often get enacted in ritual, and it should, right? At least for a time. It doesn't have to be for long term. But if you've had a significant event in your congregation, like you built a huge addition to your congregation, you would honor that every anniversary, at least for a time, to say, look, we did this, and we grew, and we made intentional acts with our wood and with our stones to incorporate nature and our values into our sanctuary, and this is who we are as a people. That is something that I find missing from our lives, and something I would love to do on a regular basis. So that's how I define ritual, and some examples.
And Mike, I know you had a question, so go ahead, but can you mention into the mic that I know there's a question on YouTube, and we'll get to it next if your question isn't.
Can I do what?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we know there are questions on YouTube, and we'll get to those questions, so just hang on.
Thanks.
Okay, good. I'm wondering if you see your vision of the church as a kind of coming in together and getting to know each other and bonding and making a community here, or do you see us reaching out into the world? Or, I mean, you know, and I don't think you have to say it's only one or the other, but is there a focus or a goal, or what thoughts do you have about that?
So my first year, my goal is to be with you all. I want to learn about you all. I want to have conversations with you. I want to get to know you. I do also want to work on, because it naturally happens whenever there is a new minister, and it's not about who that person it is. It's about the fact that there's a new person in that role. Inevitably, there is usually a large influx of people coming in from the community, including people returning, and they're interested and they want to know what's happening. And I want to set us up in a way that we can welcome those folks into our community as well. So membership generally is where I plan to have my focus for the first year. I want to get to know you. I want you to set yourselves up for community building with everyone who's already here and for those who are going to come in. And eventually, yes, I do hope we can do outreach in the community, but I really hope that that's driven by your passions as a community. I have some ideas and how they might intersect with your work, but don't anticipate me coming up with some random thing from out of nowhere that has nothing to do with any of you or your thoughts or passions, because that's not going to happen. Because any work that I would do on that would probably fail after I eventually left, right? It really needs to be stuff that you all are interested in, whether it's justice work or just relationships with the community.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you've addressed it before. I haven't heard. I know you're in the area. I don't know, are you going to be living close to the church? I don't want to pry too much, but I don't know if you're going to be moving, your family moving. I'd like to get to know some of those kind of questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So if everything goes right, we hope to move
Okay.
as soon as possible. My family actually went house hunting today, and we're going house hunting again tomorrow. So my day off is not much of a day off. And assuming the vote goes well, maybe we could even put a bid on a house next week. The housing market's a little crazy right now, so whether or not that will actually be accepted is a whole other thing. But yeah, we are hoping to move into the area.
And where are you living now?
Oak Park?
I thought so. Okay, I wasn't sure.
Yeah. And it's doable if, all plans fail, but one of the things that's important to me is to be with my family as well. And assuming I came here during the day and wanted to go home for dinner and then come back for night meetings and then I have to go home, that's 2 hours on the road.
Right.
And I don't really want to do that.
No, I agree.
And that's not fair to you all either, to have an exhausted minister, or my children to have an exhausted mother.
Right.
So,
That sounds good, yeah. I know I'm in a business and there's people that always think that they can make a 90-minute commute or something like that, but yeah, it just
It's a
never really works out.
yeah, no, it definitely
So your
doesn't.
kids would be going to new schools and,
They would, and they're actually excited about that opportunity.
Okay.
So, fingers crossed that it stays that way.
and would your husband be taking the train into the city or something like that?
So, my partner doesn't go in very frequently to the city. He, lately it's only been 1 day a week, but he does do a lot of traveling around the country. So I think he's got like 3 trips set up just in the next 3 weeks. So he'll be traveling a lot. You won't see him as frequently as obviously you'll see me or the children. But yeah, he will be commuting, and the train would be ideal, and we may end up having to get a second vehicle as well. So he's used to taking the train. We live literally 2 blocks from the Blue Line where we currently live. So that will be slightly a disappointment in moving, but it is what it is.
And I didn't really hear, what seminary did you go to?
So I started at True Theological School in New Jersey, in Madison, New Jersey, and I was there for 1.5 years, and then we picked up and we moved here, and I transferred because they didn't have any classes online. And then the pandemic hit and they had all their classes online, but I had already transferred, so what can you do? So I transferred to Chicago Theological School. No, I did not go to Meadville. When your partner is president at Meadville, there's some boundary issues, and it would be weird to have his faculty teaching his partner. But I also I intentionally went to Christian schools because there's a wealth of knowledge there. They've literally done theological work for a millennia, and CTS actually has a curriculum that has been. They have an agreement with Bayan University, which is a Muslim university, and so I have Muslim students in my class, and their faculty is really diverse. I actually took my Hebrew Bible classes with a rabbi, so I actually got a whole bunch of different perspectives, and that was really helpful to me. And for interfaith dialogue in the future, it's a tool that I will very much use. And the relationships that I've cultivated with clergy of other traditions. It's really helpful. So.
Okay.
Can I get this question from YouTube in, and then if we have more questions we can
Yeah, sounds good.
Hello there. Thank you to your patience to whoever asked this question on YouTube. But we had some really good conversation going. I didn't want to interrupt. Yes, ma'am.
I'm having a lot of trouble understanding what you're saying.
I will try to enunciate better. Was that a little bit better there?
A little bit better.
Okay. I speak too quickly, and with a mask on, that makes it even worse. So thank you for telling me. So we have a question from YouTube. They have waited patiently for their answer, so thank you. We were in the middle of a great discussion. This one says, will you sometimes attend Science Sundays? Prior ministers did not, and it made some of us feel less integrated in the church community and philosophy perspectives. I think also those were not integrated is the sense here. It would also be great to see some of the youth being encouraged to participate in Science Sundays, which is a big part of adult enrichment at DUUC.
Yeah. I would love to attend Science Sundays.
More than one.
I can't say that I'll do them all the time. We're, leading worship on a Sunday morning. There's a thing as religious professionals, Sunday afternoon naps. And I very much participate in those.
Science Sunday presenters.
Yeah, I bet you do. And even more so, I would love to see how we might be able to even partner on some topics. So like a whole Sunday has a theme, that could be amazing. And if that works with our whole church ministry, like there are lots of possibilities. I would love to partner with you all on that work. So the youth question is interesting, the youth part of this, because I think generally speaking, and we had this conversation this morning, I'm losing time, sorry, with the pastoral associates. Mm-hmm. We are finding ourselves in a particular space with youth in this moment. And part of that is the pandemic hit youth populations really hard. They did not have the same level of connection because Zoom is exhausting, and when you are on it all day for school, you lose your connections, and you don't want to also be there on Sunday morning on Zoom. Added to that is the literal crisis we are in this country with mental health issues that this pandemic has exacerbated, and it has hit teen and youth populations exceptionally hard. And so, of course, I would encourage anyone to be full participants in all areas of our congregation, and I think we really actually need to consider ways that we can just offer youth a safe space, a brave space to be in this moment and to create community. And that may be things like Science Sunday and worship, but I actually think we're going to have to be more creative than that. I think we're going to have to really kind of brainstorm with youth and teens about what they need and want and how we can help make that happen for them. I think that last night, I think it was, I don't remember who asked the question or what the exact question was. Oh, it was about what is one of our challenges as Unitarian Universalists? And one of the things that I named was that we sometimes don't act fast enough. We need to hear too many opinions. We need everybody to be on the same boat. This is one of those moments we have to act fast. We are literally losing youth in this country at a rate that is too quick. And just on trans LGBTQ issues alone, the suicide rate is just exploding. It's awful. We need to move fast on this issue, and we need to do something about it immediately. And so I speak out of a sense of urgency around this topic because there is one. And this is not one where we can dilly-daddle. We really actually need to make some decisions and offer things. So I know that was a long answer and not exactly what in regards specifically to the Science Forum, but it's something that I'm deeply passionate about, as I have 2 teenagers and their friends, and all of them have struggled during this pandemic, as have all the other youth I know right now. So.
I'd like to follow up just a bit on the science.
For sure.
Yeah, I would feel we would be more than willing to move at whatever pace is a good pace to do. It has felt like it hasn't. We've had a few kids that have come to Science Sundays with their parents, and they love rockets or they love dinosaurs, and they want to. We had a kid just before the pandemic who was going to give a talk, and I think it was for his Eagle Scout project or something like that. So we feel like there is so much available that you can hit kids at this spot when they are interested in science.
Yes.
So that's, and it can be a good haven for kids that are science lovers that maybe had other problems, getting along because of, or fitting in with all the Zoom challenges too. So, there's been, times we think we've emphasized certain points and made things that way, and we'd like the church to notice that and see it and, foster it a little bit, and that's something that maybe Steve and I have to work together more with.
Yeah, it's definitely part of the tools that we can use to address the larger issue, absolutely. Yeah.
I personally would really appreciate a science Sunday talking about the medical issues for trans kids. If we could find a doctor in the area, I would, wait, I'm going to try not to cry. But I think as a grandparent, I'm facing some concerns. I won't be the one necessarily in a doctor's office. I would love to have some information, and I think there's probably somebody who can speak to that. And you might find a lot of kids and parents and grandparents that would really love that topic to be explored.
We'll make sure we make a point of it.
Okay?
Thank you, Diane. That's,
Yeah.
yes.
Because there's a lot I don't know. I have a biology degree. I can start with some premises, but I could be so much better schooled.
I think this is a lay-led Science Sunday thing, so, you know, we can get people in, and I would welcome any help that you could give us
Sure.
to locate people that
Mhm.
do that. I know when COVID started coming, maybe,
Yeah.
When COVID came, we talked to the DuPage medical group and trying to get the county to send somebody over. And they said, well, they didn't want to do it because of COVID. And then I said, well, we can stream it and you can even do it ahead of time and send, you may have something already. And they basically kind of passed on it, you know, so it was a little disappointing when we thought there were things to present about that. But in a similar way, I think that's a fine point.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great idea, Diane. Yeah.
This is Michael.
Hey, Michael, like Andy.
Michael has been leading discussions about. I'm going to talk for Michael, but but Michael has been leading discussions about many other belief systems
Oh.
here at our church.
Yes, great.
And I think you attend the pagan group.
I found myself partially in control of it.
Yes,
Attending, but
not just attending, but ringleader.
Sometimes happens.
So that's who Michael is.
Wonderful. It's lovely to meet you.
you as well.
All right.
I'm wondering, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm wondering, when you attend a service with a minister who is not you,
Yes.
what is it about the service, the preaching, service in general, that maybe I'd say moves you or makes you say, wow, or you come out of there thinking, I've just experienced something?
Yes. So worship services that are cohesive, that flow really well, that all the parts really fit together. Services that are done like that really speak to me because it becomes a whole experience. It's not just, oh, here's a piece of music, here's a reading, and you have to figure out how those things fit together. That doesn't really speak to me. So I love services that are all cohesive, and you notice that I will attempt to do that for my own services. I like services that make me think and that challenge me to act in a new way, and inspire me in by providing some potential options for that. I don't necessarily need a charismatic, like the old school fire and brimstone minister. Like I don't really need that. In fact, actually, some of the ministers that I feel are some of the most powerful are those who actually show very little emotion, but just know how to emphasize the right words. And so knowing how to really get your point across is what I look for in a minister. I often am just enthusiastic. I may learn that skill someday. But yeah, the cohesive services, things that challenge me, make me think, and then inspire me to go out and do something differently. Those are the ones that I look for. Good music. Good music.
Yes, I had 2 questions. The first is kind of to pick up from that. When it comes to your own preaching style, is it solely, do you focus on making one think, or is there any emphasis or any importance to making people feel?
Yes, it has to be both. It has to be both. It's great to speak to the head and get people thinking, but if we don't move the heart, then you actually don't move the body. So I think about, I think in Trinities. I know I'm a Unitarian, but I think in Trinities all the time.
That's why they were Unitarians. There was no Trinity.
But I think of it in the Trinity of head, heart, and body. And if we want to move the body, and by that I mean enact our principles out in the world, then we have to connect the head with the heart to move the body.
Sorry, I'm tripping over my words a bit.
That's okay.
I have heard that one of the things that has been a stumbling block for Unitarian Universalism is many, especially younger people, feeling that I don't want to go to a lecture on Sunday. I want something that's going to make me feel that if it's purely cerebral, it's, this is one of my days off from school, I don't want a lecture. And they need to be able to feel something.
Yep.
And I personally relate to that, is that as cerebral and intellectual I can be on certain subjects, I actually want to feel something.
Yeah.
I actually, I have plenty of, ideology and dry books of all kinds to occupy me during the week.
Right.
My second question is I'm actually on the group handling adult enrichment. The COVID has kind of made that difficult because the whole need to have everything online. And so I was curious, is that something you would want to be active in, that you would be on top of as, I feel in my experience then when you have the minister active in that, it does give it fits in better with what else is going on in the church. It informs everything. It's kind of when you don't have a minister active in that, it creates kind of a discontinuity between things, is you don't have, I'm sorry, I'm tripping over my words.
Sorry.
I'm trying to talk faster than I do best when I take pauses. I don't want to leave people on YouTube being like, get on with it. But yeah, so I would very much think it a good thing to be involved with that, as my particular work that Diane mentioned is one of the many things under that umbrella.
Right.
And it is still a work in progress, again, because of COVID, but I would think it would be very good to have a new perspective and somebody who is coming in from outside who can maybe give ideas or give an additional perspective, as in what you talked about, a lot of, say, trans kids having a hard time. And it sounds like it's something you are knowledgeable about, that you have a passion for, and that is something we don't really have here. And by having somebody active with that, be it even trans adults, something, or to help adults who are from prior generations know how to interact with people, because I was born in 1980, and I remember as a kid, I remember with a lot of my life when that was something people didn't think about, something people didn't acknowledge. It was totally, what? It was this fringe in this, part of society we didn't talk about, we didn't recognize. And there are a lot of people, I think, who my age or older, who are not unwilling to open up to it. They have no idea how to.
Right.
And so if we're to really help people adjust to the changes of society and thereby benefit younger people and those who've had to live with these issues being trapped in the quote-unquote closet or having to hide this because of all of the social pressure to not. If you can create a dialogue or a bridge between newer generations and older generations, I would think that would be very beneficial for all involved. As my own looking into it is that you do, a lot of this is a generational clash for a lot of people, because once you've lived for 40, 50, 60, 80 years, it can be hard to adjust to new ideas and new things, and there can be a lot of prejudice, a lot of distrust, there are many older people who do feel threatened by it because it's the Archie Bunker scenario. It's where, the world is changing and you don't know how to deal with it, and so you lash out. And so I feel like if there was some way to foster a dialogue, not only in the church, but kind of even in the community with us involved, I think that would be very beneficial to us as a congregation.
I agree. Yes. So adult enrichment is something that I approach from a holistic congregational perspective, in that it also intersects with membership classes like I spoke about earlier. It intersects with social justice work and how you're a perfect example of how we can better be informed and advocate for trans issues, for instance. And I obviously would love to have a role in that. And that also intersects with what's happening in the pulpit, right? So I'm happy to be involved in adult enrichment, and Steve and I have already had some conversations about how we can make that happen, and I'm sure that dialogue will continue. Yeah, thank you.
Are you just passing the microphone?
Oh, you have a question? I'm sorry, I missed that.
Just how good are you at remembering people's names when you see them, and how long do you think it'll take you to kind of really,
So I'm actually really good at remembering people's names, but it does take me a little bit to get there.
Okay.
One thing that helps is that when I have a picture directory in front of me, I can go through that. I learned all 350 members' names and their children's names in the 3 months that it took me to clean up the database at my previous congregation. So that was 3 months. And I didn't even meet them in person. I was able to do that. And it was because I'm a visual person, and especially with reading. And so the more I can read your name, so the more you wear your name tags, I will literally see your face, and I'll have your name tag on you, even if you don't. So the more you wear your name tags, the quicker I will get there.
And wear your own name tag.
Yes.
Yes,
I know.
Diane, wear
I
your own
forgot
name
it
tag.
today.
Because I wore Dave Gorman's this afternoon. Because the initials were right.
We're the same, D and G. Yes.
to wear yours.
I know, it's gonna be great. But go ahead.
Yes, so wear your own name tag. Please don't wear somebody else's, because then that image will forever be stuck in my mind, and I will forever get your name wrong.
What happened to you?
Yeah. Where is your beard? So I'm good with names. But I do need to have that connection of being able to read them. It's just how my brain works. So, and also it's, I think, living into our first Unitarian Universalist principle that you all have inherent worth and dignity. So I should remember your names. That's the least somebody can do.
Good question.
Do we have any more online questions, or any of our guests? Oh, all right.
I find that people still ask, what is Unitarian Universalism? And, they live around, the building itself is kind of isolated in terms of not having a sign up out in front, not having people who drive back and forth past it. But just the whole concept of Unitarian Universalism many people are not aware of, and I'm wondering how we can let them know we're here and that it might be a match for them. And of course, part of that question is how do we increase our membership, because it has plummeted.
Yeah, yeah. So the best way to increase membership in a congregation is word of mouth. It has always worked. It is the best way to do it. And that's not just to the people you know and your neighbors, but that's also just generally speaking. I've told this story so many times this week, I apologize, but I totally mortified my children this weekend. We were walking through downtown Naperville at the Riverwalk, and there was a group of young teenage-ish kids. I couldn't tell if they were high school or college, but they had a sign that said Trans Lives Matter, and they were protesting. I'm not sure what they were protesting, but they were just basically saying Trans Lives Matter, our lives matter. And I stopped and I said, well, if everything goes right on Sunday, I may be DuPage Church's minister beginning August 1st. But even if I'm not, you should stop in at DuPage UU Church if you ever are looking for allies. I didn't do anything grand. I didn't do anything super special. I did something that you all could do. And I think word of mouth is really the way to go. And with that said, some churches run a class called UU Elevator Speeches. And maybe we should host one here on how to create your own Unitarian Universalist elevator speech. I've actually done it on a Sunday morning during a worship service, and why it's important to be able to tell people what Unitarian Universalism is in 30 seconds. So, we can explore how we can best do that. Sometimes it's just in passing even, just I'm sorry, I couldn't go to that event because I'll be at church on Sunday. Oh, really? What church do you go to, right? And then allowing that conversation to happen. But word of mouth is literally the best way for churches to grow. And so that's really all of our jobs.
I guess in that vein of growing churches, what has been your experience in terms of kind of, I guess, from an administrative standpoint, or what kind of functions in the church kind of help us to, build or kind of bring in the congregation or keep the congregation connected? Because we've gone through 2 years of kind of pandemic where we're trying to come back together, but what are the kind of the effective ways to try to get people connected, and what resources do you think should be appropriately applied kind of going forward if we could?
Right. So I think I can answer what I think is the answer to this, but I think the pandemic has changed things. And so we really are going to be doing a lot of experimenting, and sometimes it's going to fail and sometimes it'll succeed, because we're in this weird liminal space where some people are comfortable, some people are not comfortable being in person. How are we doing church online, on Zoom, right? And so this is all going to be kind of an experiment on how we're going to go ahead and be in community together. And I think the answer lies in small group ministry. And that could be actual intentional things like chalice circles, right? But it could, or book discussions as part of adult enrichment. But it could also just be a knitter circle, right? Just a small group that meets on occasion or regularly and gets to know each other. The elder circle on Zoom is already doing this, and that's how you all create connections and community with each other. So I really do believe the future lies in small groups, and there's beyond the fact that creates a very strong sense of intimacy with folks and allow yourself to create deep connections with other people. There's actually a very practical reason for that. We're still not safe in this pandemic, and that actually allows us to still do things safely, whether it's in person or not. Also, small group ministry that happens in Zoom and online is so much easier than doing coffee hour with 35 people on Zoom, right? When you have only 5 or 6 people, or tops 10, right, that you are meeting with, everybody can still have a say, everybody still can interact. The larger the group, the harder that is online. So that's kind of what I see as community building, and we will experiment. I'm sure there are other things that are going to come forward, and we'll have to tackle them as they come, but we are in a weird space right now. Yeah.
Would you say our challenges, if you'd pick our biggest challenge as a church from what you see now, or the top 3 or something, would be good to hear.
I would name, you all have a challenge around your membership work, around welcoming folks, about engaging new folks in leadership roles. And so that's one of the, and about recreating that sense of community. And some of that's the pandemic. That's not unique to you all. Some of that's your transition. That's not really something that you did or didn't do. It's just part of what happens during ministerial transition. And your transition was much longer and in the middle of a pandemic, right? So for me, that is a huge focus. And it's also one of your biggest challenges, like it is for many congregations. So I would name that one as one of your biggest ones. One of them is financial. Your mortgage is very large, and it limits some of the programming that you can do because it is large. And so figuring out how we can be creative around that is going to be important. Those are the 2 I can think of off the top of my head.
We'll find others.
We'll work together on others.
So one of the most embarrassing moments of my life was taking my daughter, who sits in this room, down to Georgia. And she went to her first potluck because we had not been going to church. And she looked around the room and said, "Well, this is wonderful. Why don't we ever do this?" And I thought, you haven't been to church in a long, long time. So I just want you to know, one of the things that people have said over and over that I haven't heard this week is they miss potlucks. And at one point, when I was a very new member, someone told me one of the best times this church ever had was when they had lost this minister and tossed that minister, and they had to meet together at potluck dinners all the time because they had to run their own church. And we need to come up with a safe version of potlucks. You won't be here till August, but last year, Steve or someone rented a tent.
Oh, lovely.
And we did quite a bit outdoors until it blew away.
Oh, no.
Yeah, but it was a fabulous way for us to utilize our space, to be outdoors together, to be safe together.
Yeah.
And people really miss that.
Yeah.
And it's also the symbolism that a family eats together. So if we eat together, we must be a family.
Yeah, the connections that food
It's a
brings
huge
is
ritual.
particularly unique.
Yeah.
There's actually a meal ministry in the UU world around Zoom and eating meals.
Really?
Yeah. So it's happening, and I agree. I mean, let's make use of the summer for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
But in a way, growing our church and creating community happens at the small meals that happen at service auction, right?
Yeah, that's true too.
The food is a key ingredient, right?
Yep.
And I love me a potluck, let me just tell you.
Yeah.
I'll take it if nobody else has a question. So we haven't talked a lot about social justice now, though we did touch on it briefly. What in your opinion, in your experience, what is unique or special about the Unitarian Universalist approach to social justice?
Are you thinking Unitarian Universalism at like just in general, or the way that you use like some of the stuff that's happening at the denominational level, or does it not matter?
I think either one of those. Yeah, I think I was speaking very generally.
Okay.
So anything that you want to touch on is.
So some of the most powerful things that I have seen happen in our movement is those where we don't try to invent the wheel, and where we partner with other groups, whether they're other UU churches that we're partnering with, or whether they're just a whole nother movement. I am thrilled with the work that the Poor People's Campaign is doing, because that's exactly what they're doing, is they're doing this massive interfaith movement, and we as UUs have not gotten involved in it in the same way. Reverend William Barber, who is one of the leaders of it, came to General Assembly in 2017 in Columbus, Ohio, and I haven't heard anything since. And I think that that's a missed opportunity for us. So I know I didn't answer what good stuff do we do, but I think that we have done some. So I think it's worth noting that sometimes we don't get as involved in those kinds of collective things, and I think there's a lot of reasons for that. And I think that's a missed opportunity. With that said, I think our UU the Vote work is awesome. It comes out of the denominational level, out of the office that does the Side of Love campaign. You all may have been involved in it in the last election cycle, maybe just writing postcards to to people in swing states, just telling them to vote. It wasn't partisan, it was just please get out and vote. They launched last week for this next election cycle. And the work that they're doing is an example of what the Poor People's Campaign is doing, which is actually on a smaller scale, but it's actually getting congregants or congregations across the entire United States to get involved in this work. I think there was a member at Unity Temple that literally wrote 300 postcards the last election cycle. She was stuck inside because of the pandemic and just sat there during all of her Zoom meetings, writing messages to people and signing her name. It's such a simple thing, and it makes such a huge difference. There were other people that were calling, so they have a whole system the way that they've done it, and they've run it so beautifully. That's the best examples of our work and our justice work out in the world, living our values of democracy. And I think that we've also missed opportunities as well.
Follow up, are you,
I just wanted to
you
add,
follow too?
okay, I just wanted to add to what you're saying on a local level was there's a group in Proviso Township,
Yes.
group of ministers, and some of us went there, and it was from them that we got the idea for the SMILE program. So I agree, things like that really, really do help.
Right, right. Some of our greatest assets are actually like things like the UU Prison Ministry of Illinois and the UU and A&I, the Advocacy Network of Illinois. And I don't know that we utilize those things as well as we could as congregations, and I think we could do better at that. Yeah.
Are you familiar with UUSC?
Yes.
Okay. That's pretty important to a number of people in here in this congregation as well too.
Yeah.
And it is a way to do social justice and not reinvent the whole wheel
Yes.
of, what are we going to emphasize or what are we going to do?
Right.
They do a lot of good work, and been at the border and in the Philippines during things. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, the partnerships that they've created with local communities who know their community better than we do, and how we can best get help to them. That feels like a no-brainer to me. That's what we should be doing. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep.
I think I might have a YouTube one, but my phone is not vibrating. Oh, here I've got a question for you too. Actually, it's a question for Chris Knight.
All right, so the AV tech up in the loft says, AV wants to know what kind of music you like to listen to. In the past, we've had quite a bit of musical talent perform in services.
Mm-hmm. I love a lot of different kinds of music. Not all kinds of music. My tastes are not as eclectic as my partner's. But by far my favorite is folk music and modern folk music. I adore Brandy Carlisle and the Waylon Jennys. That's the kind of music that I love. And I love to sing it. And maybe someday I will sing for you all. Not that my voice is fantastic, but I love singing those songs. And I love singing, period. I love to sing. I love to sing hymns as well. And one of my greatest joys as a Unitarian Universalist was opening up our hymnal, which I acknowledge half of it is unsingable because the tunes are so bizarre. But a good number of the songs or hymns in the hymnal are old Christian hymns that have been rewritten in beautiful language. My most favorite of them all will be sung on Sunday. We will be singing Wake Now My Senses. I love that song to the tune of Be Thou My Vision. And the words are so powerful. And that was one of my greatest joys as a UU. And I love hymns. I love hymns. So, yeah. But if you want something more eclectic, my oldest loves K-pop at the moment. So if you want to have a conversation around K-pop, there you go. Yes, talk to them.
All right, well, here's a question that I've been thinking about a little bit recently,
Oh, no.
because I know it came up at, I'm going to embarrass myself if I try to say where I remember this coming up, because that's going to be wrong, but someone was speaking at GA talking about Unitarian Universalism at its best. And I just think that's such a great thing to envision, because we have challenges, but if we know what we're working towards, then we can get somewhere, right?
Right.
So what do you think is Unitarian Universalism at its best?
I think Unitarian Universalism at its best is a community that works in tandem to do all the things that we are already starting to do. So that has robust faith development for all ages, that goes out and does its work, that literally lives its values in every aspect of our community, that knows when to move in a sense of urgency and when to discern that we need to take more time. So what I would name is Unitarian Universalism at its best is congregations that know how to balance themselves through living through their values. And when I talk about balance, I'm not talking about a scale that's like this. I'm talking about a mobile, like a children's mobile that hangs over your bed. There's always, or over a crib, there's always multiple different things that are hanging off of it. And the idea is that we balance them all. Because for me, that is about living into beloved community. That is about a group of people who really understand what community is so we can accomplish the work of making ourselves better and making our world a better place. So for me, that is you at its best. I don't have some grand scheme that we all become UUs, every person in the United States, because that'll never happen. But really, a community that does that work and is in solidarity with one another is going to change the world. One little thing at a time, and I am a firm believer in the butterfly effect. That one little thing makes such a big difference in this world. Even if it's just saying what you need to say to somebody in need or smiling at a cashier in a grocery store. And a community that does that in solidarity with one another through the hard things, that is UU at its best.
Oh, here we go. 1 second.
I feel like I'm asking a lot of questions, but the group is small and a lot of things come to mind. With a congregation of, say, 250 to 300 people, which is ours, how do you see a minister, I don't know if the word's responding, but how how do you see a minister's role in, well, I guess responding to people who are very, very ill, people who are hospitalized, have major traumas going on that are brought to your attention?
That is most certainly my job. It's also my job to partner with the pastoral associates. There's no way that one person can handle pastoral requests from 300 people. And especially when they are large, like an emergency or a sudden death, that is certainly my responsibility to respond in that moment. Just a phone call at first and asking what someone needs, and then being there if they need my presence. Absolutely, yeah. You're cheating. You have prepared questions on note cards. Oh my goodness.
You know, people have covered a lot of them.
We covered,
Yes.
we covered a lot of the subjects. But we'll touch on one that we're here. You know, we talked about our church or our organization. We've been working on this area of kind of governance, right? This shift to governance, the policy governance, and you know, I guess the question is, you know, how will policy governance kind of help the church live its values and mission? I mean, given your experience in this from you were a church administrator, you worked, and how do you see that helping us going forward? And I know we've talked to you about this, you know, along the way, but
Yeah.
you can opportunity to comment on it.
Yeah. So I understand the board's role, the Board of Trustees' role, as providing providing the vision for living into the congregation's mission. That's what you elect them to do, is to provide the vision and how we are going to move further and closer to DuPage UU's goal mission. And so governance allows the board to set that vision. And then my job as minister is to partner with them to figure out how we as a congregation can do that work through our programs. And so it's about, you know, that, and this is where your governance work then meets your whole ministry work, right? This is how we take that whole ministry stuff that's happening already and align it with the goals of the board, and that's how we can together move closer to the mission. It's also, governance is a way for us to live into our mission in other ways through the actual organizational structure of a congregation. And I've had conversations with the board and with the other staff members and many other people about how we might do that. As an example, one of the things that Unity Temple has wanted to do is implement the 8th principle to vote on it. And what they realized is that they didn't actually want to vote on the principle. They wanted to do the work of the principle, anti-oppression, anti-racist work. And voting on it wasn't necessarily going to automatically get them where they wanted to be. And it lives into their mission to do this work of anti-oppression, anti-racist work. And so they are actually creating a task force that's going to look at ways that they can actually put it into their organizational structure. And one suggestion is possibly requiring anti-oppression, anti-racist training for all its board members. And then maybe eventually all its committee members. And then maybe requiring it for 50% of the congregation, or, you know, strongly suggesting it, and then maybe 75% of the congregation. So there's these steps that they're creating, and that's how that's how governance can help you, is by integrating what it is your goals are into both the structure of your congregation in very real, very specific ways, but it also helps you align your goals when you align it with something like your whole church ministry. So you're also doing your programming that aligns with your board's goals. I have dreamt of a church that is ready to do that work specifically, and you are the closest to that work of any church that I have seen. It is incredible. Your governance work and what your goals are with what Steve has brought you with your whole church ministry is so close to really integrating that vision of Unitarian Universalism, the ideal. Y'all are so close in some ways to at least getting the infrastructure there to get you further along. And that's amazing. And that excites me. And that's something I want to do with you all.
That's good, because we've been at that for a long time. It's been a bit of a journey.
I think we got about 10 minutes left. I'm going to put out a last call for questions so that people on YouTube know that.
Okay, yeah, so we have about 10 minutes left. So anybody that is online that wants to ask a question, please put that in the chat box, and it'll come down to us, and we can ask a question. In the meantime, I have all my pre-written questions here. Except that you answered them all already. That's, I don't,
We haven't talked a lot about stewardship.
we can ask a question about stewardship.
I have talked a lot about stewardship, but
Yeah, but not tonight. No.
not tonight, earlier today.
Yeah, I guess I can. So I guess you've talked a lot about it. Maybe you can kind of maybe summarize some of your kind of thoughts around the stewardship, and because we have our own stewardship committee. We've just come through campaign now on stewardship, and not to answer the question, I know we've tried to make it kind of more of a year-round thing instead of just kind of a one-time. And so what are your thoughts about that? Would be lovely.
Great. So I don't think of stewardship purely as financial. Stewardship is a responsibility that we take on when we become members of a congregation. And that's to be fiscally responsible for our building and our programs and our staff as good employers. But it's also about how we give of our time and our talents as well. And I take that very seriously. And I know there's a whole cliche about time, talent, and treasure. And it's really important because we are responsible for this community, and it is a democracy. And so all of us need to be part of that. So my understanding of stewardship is that it's just a natural gift that we give to our community, an act of reciprocity for all the things that we have been given by our community. And what we give out of abundance, and I don't mean abundance of money, I mean abundance of the gifts that we have been given, we get back. I do believe that. The more generous and the more we give in gratitude to our community, time, talent, or treasure, the more we get out of it. And so that's my approach to, and that's my own, when I say that, it means that I become a pledging member, well, not member, but a pledger here at DuPage UU Church as well. Because it's out of the gifts you give me that I give back of my time and treasure as well.
Do you like the name DUUC?
Duck. I actually love the name DuPage UU Church. And you will, I have a big thing about, I really hate acronyms. And I hate acronyms because it's insider language. And it's just not fair to people who don't know what those things mean. Especially newcomers when they come in. My oldest cringes every time they hear an acronym. And let me tell you, there are many of them. We one time played a card game as we were going on a long distance trip, just trying to name all the UU acronyms we know. There's a lot of them. It took us probably a good hour to get through most of them. And with that said, I think it is fabulous that you call yourself ducks. I love it. Because let me tell you, there are some congregations' acronyms that are not appropriate. So, I love that you have duck. It's fabulous.
But I mean, a whole other potential name. Should it be a church? Are we a church? Or are we a congregation? Or a gathering? Or different things like that? And what does it imply when we call ourselves a church? And it doesn't roll off the tongue real clearly. Unitarian, Universalist Church. And I tend to disagree with, quite a few of them. But, or feel like they're clunky.
Right. So I actually do like the word church. And the reason I like the word church specifically is because there's a universality to it, that when you name it out there in the world to anyone, people know what you're talking about. They might have the wrong impression that we are a conservative evangelical church, but they know what church means, at least from a very basic level. Congregation is not bad. It does imply for a lot of people some sort of Jewish background or Jewish understanding of the word. That's not necessarily bad, and our roots are Judeo-Christian, so that could align well. I don't love the word fellowship, and you all don't fit into that category. I know that you all early on were designated as a fellowship because you emerged at roughly around the time that actual fellowships were, which is like the 50s and 60s, but you all had a minister from the beginning, and fellowships historically do not. And that makes you particularly unique. So fellowship doesn't quite fit for me. I don't know, is there any other options that I've heard out there? I don't think
Congregation?
so. Yeah, I did congregation.
Okay.
Uh-oh. This guy, you brought up a real hot topic.
Oh, yes. Back before our last settled minister, I was part of a committee to look at the name of DUUC and whether people were in favor of something else. My husband was a birthright Jew and found this place and left Congregation Beth Shalom and Congregation Eitz Chaim in the area. And I converted to Judaism, and so I am a Jew as well. I feel that the word church is Christian, and the word congregation is more inclusive. When my husband chose to come here and try it out, and he said he was going to church, I couldn't believe it. I had converted away from church, right?
Yeah.
So there are those of us who would love to have it called a congregation. The letters stay the same.
They do.
We still would be ducks. And I think that it might be more appealing to some people who do come from a Jewish or some other background.
Or just don't want to go to church.
Or just don't want to go to church, yeah. So you will find that I do not use the word church.
It's okay.
And I don't think that means anything to anybody except me.
Yep.
There's a lot of talk about many religious words, altar, sanctuary. Are people comfortable with those, I don't know that we have a sense, worship, yeah, faith, some of the words you've used too.
Yep.
Prayer, yeah.
Yep.
So that gets our UU juices flowing, right? We start contemplating all the fairnesses and unfairnesses.
Yes. And there. And yes, I think church and congregation, I think either of those are fine and appropriate words. I also don't want us to get hung up on names, right? And I also want us to be universally accepting. What I'll tell you is that the very humanist fellowship that I went to in Morristown, they called it a lectern. Like the pulpit was the lectern because they didn't want that. And they called the sanctuary a meeting room. And to a T, everybody who walked in that room, in that church as newcomers didn't know what the heck anyone was talking about. And that is not helpful for anyone. And so, yes, there's some baggage around sanctuary, and we can redefine it how we like, and it's really important that we make people as welcome as possible, and the universal language as accepting and you know, it should be words that people know, whatever they are.
But church and sanctuary are somewhat exclusive too, excluding.
Church more so. Sanctuary is something that's kind of universal across most religious traditions. There's Jewish congregations use that word, as do Muslims, and even some Buddhist and Hindu traditions use the word sanctuary. So,
Or non-religious places.
yes. Mm-hmm.
There's also other organizations that identify as church, which some of them are infamous, like the Church of Satan or the church, if you really want to call it the Church of the Subgenius.
Yes. Infamous church names, yes.
But in my experience,
Can we make sure that the people on YouTube can understand what we're talking about?
yes, church is a very, in my experience, and I came from a Lutheran background. I am well learned in comparative world religion and mythology and the occult and all these different subjects relating to church. It is a term I know that has a lot of baggage for people. And there's also the idea with Unitarian Universalists, that doesn't sound like a church, or what do you believe? Or, you don't believe in anything. There's that assumption because you believe in a God. Well, some people do, others do not. Well, is it really a church then?
Right.
But it is also, to save a story, in my background, it is difficult to necessarily appeal to people with terms that they don't understand or don't know.
Yes.
And sometimes there probably isn't any right answer to this, honestly.
I think you're right.
It's so arbitrary, and there's a term that I've heard that can apply to it. So you get 2 rabbis in a room and you end up with 3 opinions. You get 15 Unitarian Universalists in the room, you end up with 25 opinions. And so I don't know that we're ever going to come to some point where we're all happy with it necessarily. And I do think whether church is or isn't the right name, you do need something that people have an idea for. Otherwise, they will think it's some kind of club, or you do need something that says what you are. Otherwise, you run the risk of how many different civic groups or just clubs. People might not know what it is. They don't necessarily know who the Unitarians or the Universalists were, and thus they don't know what modern Unitarian Universalists are. If somebody says they go to page Unitarian Universalist something, it's perhaps obscure enough with the term church. I wonder if it'll be a little more obscure with something else. But I do think that of everything I've heard, church is probably the most appropriate term to lure people, even if there's some people it might push away. Again, I don't think there's. I'm sorry, I'm rambling, but
That's okay. You're right. I don't think there is any one right answer.
That there is no term that's going to. And I in my experience, the more people know about something, whether it's a church or a group or whatever, the more likely they are to be interested in it. If you tell me something that is just, I'm in GH23, and she's like, oh, okay. unless you actually sit there and explain it to me, I am not going to know, and I might not want to bother knowing.
Right.
So,
Thanks.
And that's why I stay here, even if it isn't church.
Yes.
Do you use God and Him in your sermons?
Sometimes, but I do try to define things and define them in ways that are flexible for people so that you all can interpret them as you wish. So oftentimes when I've said God, I'll say, or Holy One, or however you define that which is ultimate for you. I don't try to, I try to avoid assuming that somebody has the same understanding of the world that I do, and so I always try to define that. I do use the word hymn because they are historically hymns, and I think it's the right word to use for something that is a hymn.
I mean him, like the father.
Okay, like the pronoun him, father.
Right.
No, that's not something that I do because if I ever use a pronoun with God, it's usually she or they. But it also depends on the religious tradition that I am invoking, right?
Okay.
One of the most charming moments in our history, right after we built the sanctuary, was that the ground behind us was clay, and we developed
I've heard
a
this story.
pond.
Yes.
And then we had ducks, and it was the best.
The ducks at duck.
The ducks at duck.
I love it.
And one of the reasons that we have left it at the word church is that it's a search term. And so many people find us online, and what they search for is usually that word. And if we use congregation, we may or may not get them.
Right.
So,
Where you don't have to believe in God.
yeah.
Yeah.
The page at your church.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true.
Well, it's interesting when you're, saying that one church or whatever, you didn't have a sanctuary, you had a meeting room.
Yes.
And I like the term sanctuary because when I come here for the service on Sunday, it's a time I sort of put everyday worries and issues to the side.
Yes.
And so, to me, it's sacred, not necessarily meaning that, my person gave it to me, but it is something that is special to me, and,
Yes.
so, yeah.
Yeah. That's also the reason that I typically wear a robe at worship, is because for me, this is a sanctuary. It is a sacred space for me. Yeah.
All right, well, we have had some excellent discussions tonight,
We
and I think we should bring it to a close for this particular session, but hopefully these conversations will continue over the next couple days, hopefully over the next several years, if all goes well.
All goes well?
But I have an excellent closing question that has come in from YouTube, which is, prepare yourself. What is the meaning of life?
Oh, wow.
And there's a little bit of more explanation. I just got a letter from a high school student who was curious about that, and I am in the process of giving my own answer. What is yours? As ever, the youth compelling us to think about some very difficult questions.
The future rests on your answer.
Yes, the future
No
rests on this
pressure
answer
or
right now. No
anything.
pressure.
It's all, yeah. So I am going to answer this from my Taoist perspective, which informs my Unitarian Universalist understanding. So I rely on philosophers who translate the way, not as many have done, which is, literally the way, but as making our lives significant. And I think, for me, that is the purpose of life, is to find a way to make our lives significant. And for me, our Unitarian Universalist principles answer how we can do that. And then we can use our imagination and our co-creative relationships with each other to actually bring that significance out into the world and change the world. And so for me, that is the answer, making our lives significant together.
Well, thank you everyone so much for joining us, both those of us who are here in the sanctuary or the meeting room or
No,
whatever.
sanctuary.
The sanctuary.
Sanctuary.
She says it's a sanctuary. But those of us who are here in person and those of us who have joined us on YouTube, we really appreciate it. This board member is gesturing at me and I live with her, so.
Chris,
And
thank
Chris,
you.
and thank you to Chris, our tech person up in the loft. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Yes.
We really appreciate your time. We appreciate your thoughts. And please remember that on Saturday, we are having an open house between noon and 4. If you get a chance to RSVP, that is helpful to us. And also because then I will send you the Zoom link if you're going to participate virtually. And we would love to have you here, especially any parents and youth, because we know that's a better format for people with small children in particular. There will be games. And we will also, of course, have our next Sunday service. Mandy will be leading the service on Sunday. Please join us in person or online. And there will be a vote at 11:30 to call Mandy as our settled minister. And we need a quorum of 40% of the membership of the church. So please attend either in person or join the meeting on Zoom. And that link will be sent out by the board. Sure. It will be. We really appreciate you all being here. Thank you so much, and have a lovely evening.